They said he was a waste of hay, a bad investment with soft bones and no future. On paper he was just a number on a breeding chart crossed out in red ink. But the day that young bull stood between a raging storm and the only man who ever believed in him, every number on that paper suddenly meant nothing. Rain had fallen all week on the Broken Creek Ranch, turning the Texas dirt into heavy mud that clung to boots and tires. The calf they later called Rusty had come into that world on a cold March night, small and skinny, with a crooked ear and a chest that rose and fell too fast. The big breeding farm that owned his mother had made their choice early. Cull him, the manager had said, not even looking up from his clipboard. Too small. Won't gain. Waste of feed. Only one man had stopped beside the pen and actually looked at the calf. Clay Walker, a quiet ranch hand with worn gloves and tired eyes, had rested his arm on the rail and watched the little red calf struggle to stand. He's trying, Clay had said softly. Look at him. He's not quitting. The manager had shrugged. Trying doesn't pay the bills, Walker. That calf's headed to the sale barn. To meat or whatever. Clay had gone home that night with the image stuck in his mind. The calf's shaky legs, the way he had pressed his nose against the gate as if asking for a chance he didn't understand. At his own small place 10 miles down the road, Clay had stared at his old coffee mug and his bank book, then at the empty back pasture he'd been meaning to fix up. Low profit, huh? He had muttered to himself. Maybe you're low profit for them, little guy. Maybe not for me. The next morning he had driven back to the breeding farm with a trailer, a knot in his stomach, and a question nobody there expected him to ask. Clay had spoken quietly, almost embarrassed to say it out loud. How much for the red calf in the corner pen? The small one. The manager had looked at him like he'd asked for a broken tractor. That one? You're serious? He had flipped the clipboard. $50. And that's generous. You're basically buying problems. Maybe, Clay had said, pulling out the money. But he deserves a chance. When they loaded the calf, Rusty had stumbled on the ramp, legs slipping on the metal. Clay had stepped inside the trailer, crouching low so he wouldn't scare him. He had placed one calm hand on the calf's neck. Easy now, he had murmured. I got you. Nobody's rushing you. Rusty had lifted his head slowly, the crooked ear twitching as if he was trying to decide whether this human was another rough hand or something different. Clay had waited, not pushing, not pulling, just letting the calf breathe. That patience was the first thing Rusty ever trusted. Back at the ranch, Clay's old border collie Molly had barked once in confusion at the small newcomer. Clay had laughed. Yeah, he's tiny, girl. Don't stare at him like that. Molly had wagged her tail and backed off, sensing the calf's fear. Clay had built a soft bed of hay in the barn. You'll stay here tonight, he'd said while the calf trembled under the dim light. Clean, warm, quiet. That's what you need. Rusty had watched every move, his breathing still uneven. When Clay stepped away, the calf had taken 2 careful steps after him, wanting closeness but afraid of it at the same time. Clay had stopped and smiled. You followin' me, little man? Rusty had frozen, unsure. All right, Clay had whispered, slow and gentle. You can stay close. I don't mind. That night, Clay had sat on an overturned bucket, listening to the rain hit the barn roof. Rusty had curled his legs under himself and rested his head on the hay, but his eyes never left the man who'd taken him home. Outside, thunder rolled far away. Inside, for the first time in his life, Rusty felt safe enough to close his eyes. What Clay didn't know was that this fragile calf would one day grow into a bull the ranchers would talk about for years, strong, loyal, and ready to prove that the world had been wrong about him from the start. The first weeks had tested Clay's patience more than any ranch job he ever took. Rusty was scared of everything, fluttering barn doors, Molly's tail tapping the floor, even Clay's hat when he hung it on the hook. But Clay had seen fear before in horses and old rescue cattle, and he knew one rule that always worked. Slow steps, he'd whisper. Just slow steps. Rusty had started eating better once Clay mixed a little warm milk into the feed. The calf would lift his head, mouth messy, and Clay would grin. There you go. That's the spirit. Outside the barn, neighbors had different opinions. You bought that runt? He'll never grow right. Should have saved your money, Clay. Clay always gave the same answer. He just needs time. Rusty's first big test happened one windy afternoon. Clay decided it was finally time to let him out of the barn and into the small training pen. Rusty had balked at the doorway, eyes wide at the open world he had never seen before. The wind had pushed through his coat, and he had taken a step back, pressing his side against Clay. It's all right, Clay had said, rubbing his neck. We're just talking a little walk. I'm right here. They had stepped out together, one slow step at a time. The sunlight had surprised Rusty. He blinked at the open sky, almost offended that the world was so big. Molly had trotted ahead, then circled back toward the gate, her tail wagging faster than her brain could think. Rusty had flinched when Molly barked in excitement, his legs locking for a second. Clay had snapped gently, "Molly, go easy." And the dog, smart enough to understand tone, had lowered her head and walked quietly beside them. Rusty had followed the dog's pace step by tiny step. When a gust of wind pushed through the grass, Rusty had bolted 3 steps behind Clay, thinking danger was coming. Clay had turned quickly and placed a steadying hand on the calf's shoulder. Hey, look at me, he'd said softly. Nothing's gonna hurt you here. Rusty had stood still, chest heaving, but the moment Clay kept his hand there, calm, warm, grounding, the calf had slowly settled. That day Rusty had walked the whole pen, sniffing the fence posts, learning the space, never straying more than a few feet from Clay. And when Clay finally opened the barn door for him to go back inside, Rusty had done something he'd never done before. He nudged Clay's leg gently with his nose, a small touch that felt like a thank you. Clay had paused, surprised. "Well," he'd said quietly, "you're startin' to trust me. That's a good sign." Neither of them realized it yet, but that simple moment, Rusty leaning his nose against Clay's leg, was the first hint of the bull he would become. Loyal, aware, and willing to stand his ground when it mattered most. Rusty began growing faster than anyone expected. By late summer, his ribs were no longer showing, and he had a strength in his stride that Clay noticed every time the young bull trotted beside him. Still, Rusty stayed close, almost too close at times, shadowing Clay like a big red, curious puppy. Clay never minded. One morning as Clay repaired a loose fence rail, he felt Rusty's warm breath on his back. The young bull had crept up silently, watching each hammer swing with deep focus. "You inspectin' my work?" Clay had chuckled. Rusty had lowered his head as if embarrassed to be caught studying him so closely. Over time that quiet watching became a habit. Whenever Clay fixed a gate, hauled hay, or saddled his horse, Rusty stood nearby, observing every move with that thoughtful look. But it wasn't just Rusty who was changing. Clay was changing too. For years he had lived alone on that ranch, his only company Molly and the cattle. He was a man who didn't talk much, didn't laugh much, didn't expect much. But Rusty's presence softened the edges of his days. The bull's calm steps, the way he followed Clay around the ranch, made the place feel less empty. Still, not everyone understood. One afternoon, Clay's neighbor, Ben Carter, leaned against the fence and pointed at Rusty, who was standing a few yards away, chewing slowly, eyes half closed. "That's the low-profit calf you saved?" Ben had asked, half smirking. "He still looks a little soft to me." Rusty had lifted his head at the sound, not aggressive, just alert, watchful in the way that always made Clay proud. "He's doing fine," Clay had answered. Ben had shrugged. "You're wasting time, buddy. That bull'll never be worth much." Rusty hadn't taken his eyes off Ben until the man walked away. Clay had rubbed the bull's neck. "Don't mind him. Folks see numbers. I see heart." Later that week, something small but important happened. Clay left a gate open while moving equipment across the yard. Rusty, still young and curious, wandered through it and into the larger pasture where Clay kept his older cows. Clay saw him too late. "Rusty. Wrong gate, boy." But before he could chase him down, something unexpected happened. One of the older cows, a nervous heifer known for kicking and snorting at newcomers, approached Rusty sharply. Clay held his breath, ready to intervene. Rusty didn't charge. He didn't run. He simply lowered his head, not to attack but to show calm. The heifer paused, confused, then walked away without a fuss. Clay let out a breath. Look at you," he murmured. "Growing up proper." Rusty had returned to Clay's side, brushing his shoulder gently as if asking, "Did I do right?" Clay scratched behind Rusty's crooked ear. "Yeah, you did just fine." That moment stayed in Clay's mind the rest of the day. Rusty wasn't just gaining weight, he was gaining sense. Understanding. Awareness. Something deep down told Clay that Rusty wasn't going to be just another bull in the herd. He was becoming something different, something special. Something the ranch would come to depend on far more than anyone knew yet. By Rusty's second year, he had grown into a strong, steady young bull. Not the biggest, not the kind breeders bragged about, but he carried a quiet confidence that made him stand out in a different way. He never pushed the cows around, never acted wild, never made trouble. Instead, he watched everything, and everyone. Clay noticed it most during the early mornings. He would walk out with a bucket of feed and Rusty would be waiting at the gate, not begging, not pawing, just standing there, calm and patient, like he knew Clay's footsteps before he even heard them. "You're early again," Clay would say with a soft smile. Rusty would flick his crooked ear as if answering, "I like mornings." But on the ranch, good days always had a way of being tested. One afternoon, Clay's niece, 12-year-old Lila, came to visit for the first time in months. She hadn't been herself since her parents' divorce. Quieter, jumpy, always keeping her hands tucked into her sweatshirt sleeves. Clay hoped a weekend on the ranch might help clear her mind the way open sky always cleared his. "Uncle Clay," she whispered, holding her backpack straps tightly, "is your bull nice?" Clay had looked over at Rusty, who was sunbathing near the fence, eyes half shut like a lazy dog. "He's got more manners than half the folks in this town," Clay said gently. "You'll be fine." Still, Lila stayed cautious. Later, while Clay mucked out the barn, Lila wandered near Rusty's pen. She didn't get too close, just sat on an old log a few yards away, drawing in her sketchbook. Rusty noticed her almost instantly. He lifted his head, blinked, and studied her with that thoughtful stillness he'd had since the day Clay bought him. Lila glanced up, startled to see the bull watching her. Hi," she said softly. Rusty didn't move forward. Instead, he took one step back, lowering his head just slightly, the same gentle gesture Clay had seen him use with younger calves. Lila's shoulders loosened a little. She went back to drawing. A few minutes later, the wind picked up and one of her papers slipped away, tumbling into the pen. Lila moved instinctively to grab it. "Lila, wait." Clay shouted from the barn doorway, but the wind had drowned out his voice. She reached through the fence, stretching her fingers toward the paper without noticing Rusty was now just a few feet away. Rusty stepped closer. But it wasn't aggression. He nudged the paper gently with his nose, sliding it back toward her hand. Lila froze, then slowly pulled the paper out. "Thank you," she whispered. Rusty blinked, almost proud of himself. When Clay reached them, breathless, expecting to pull Lila away, he stopped short. Lila was standing calmly. Rusty was standing calmly. The paper was safely in her hand. Clay swallowed the fear that had risen in his chest. "You all right?" he asked her. Lila nodded. He helped me." Clay stared at Rusty for a moment, heart thumping harder than the situation needed. "Yeah," he said softly, "he's good at that." That night, after Lila went inside, Rusty followed Clay along the fence as he checked the water troughs. Clay stopped and rested a hand on the bull's broad shoulder. "You saw she was scared, didn't you?" Clay murmured. "And you matched her. Gentle for gentle." Rusty stayed still, the fading sunlight catching the warm red of his coat. Clay exhaled. "You ain't just growing in size. You're growing in heart." Rusty nudged Clay's sleeve, a soft, warm push that felt almost like agreement. Clay didn't know it yet, but the way Rusty reacted to Lila's fear was the first sign that deep inside this bull was a sense of understanding most people didn't believe animals were capable of. And soon, something far bigger would test it. Autumn arrived with cool mornings and gold-colored grass stretching across the ranch. Rusty, now fully grown, carried himself with a calm strength that made Clay proud every time he looked at him. He wasn't just a bull, he was a quiet presence, a steady heartbeat on the land. But there was one thing Clay had been putting off. The breeding program. Rusty was old enough now, and most ranchers would have already paired him with cows. Clay knew he couldn't avoid it forever. He needed calves next season. Still, something inside him hesitated. Rusty wasn't like other bulls. He was thoughtful, gentle, sensitive to moods around him. Clay didn't want to throw him into anything too fast. One morning, as Clay leaned on the fence watching Rusty graze beside Molly, he sighed. "Guess it's time, boy. You're ready." Rusty lifted his head as if he understood the shift in Clay's voice. Clay opened the gate to the pasture where 6 heifers waited. They were curious, young, and energetic, the complete opposite of Rusty's calm nature. Clay clicked his tongue. "Easy now. Don't rush it." Rusty stepped through the gate slowly, almost politely. The heifers sniffed him, circled him, tested him. One, the feistiest of the group, tossed her head, pawing the dirt like she wanted a chase. Rusty didn't react. He simply stood still, letting them learn him, understand him, trust him. Clay smiled. "Good boy," he whispered. "No bragging. No showing off." Neighbors came to watch too. Word had gotten around that Clay was finally testing the bull everyone had once called useless. Ben Carter leaned on the fence with a smirk. "I give him 2 minutes before he panics. That bull's too soft." Clay kept his eyes on Rusty. "We'll see." But Rusty didn't panic. He moved with slow confidence, reading the group the same way he always read the world, quietly. When one heifer grew nervous and stepped back, Rusty stepped back too, giving her space. When the others got playful, he moved with them, steady and patient. "Look at that," Clay whispered, not to brag but in awe. Ben frowned. "Ah, that's not normal." "Maybe normal ain't the goal," Clay said. The real surprise came 2 weeks later when Dr. Hernandez, the local vet, arrived to check on the heifers. Clay stood outside the pen, arms crossed, pretending he wasn't anxious. Rusty stood behind him, chewing slowly, his calm eyes following every move. Dr. Hernandez finished the tests and looked at Clay with raised eyebrows. "Well," she said, flipping her clipboard, "5 of your 6 heifers are confirmed pregnant." Clay blinked. 5. That's an excellent rate. Especially for a young bull. She patted Rusty's shoulder. "He's not just capable, he's smart. He picks his timing right." Clay glanced at Rusty, stunned. "You hear that, boy? They were wrong about you." Rusty gave a soft grunt, almost like he understood the meaning. Word spread fast. At the feed store. At Sunday breakfast. At the auction yard. The calf, once marked as low profit, had just outperformed bulls people paid thousands for. But the breeding success wasn't the part that changed everything. A few days later, Lila visited again. She had been drawing Rusty constantly since her last trip, little sketches of his crooked ear, his soft eyes, his strong shoulders. This time she came with a small watercolor painting she had made. She held it out shyly toward Clay. "Can I show it to him?" Clay nodded. "He'll like that." They walked to the fence where Rusty stood resting in the shade. Lila held the painting up, a soft picture of Rusty standing in a field with a warm sunset behind him. Rusty lifted his head, stepped forward, and breathed gently toward the paper. His nostrils fluttered, warm and curious. Lila smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. "I think he knows it's him," she whispered. Clay swallowed hard. "He's special, Lila. Always has been." Rusty lowered his head, nudging the fence softly, inviting her closer. In that moment, Lila touched his forehead with her small palm, quiet, brave, trusting. Rusty stood absolutely still, not daring to move. Clay watched them silently, feeling something settle deep inside him. Something warm, something right. The bull the world threw away was becoming the heart of this ranch. Clay didn't realize it yet, but Rusty's greatest test, the moment that would define him forever, was already moving toward them like a slow, quiet wind across the fields. Winter came early that year, rolling over the ranch with long nights, cold winds, and skies the color of faded steel. Clay didn't mind, he'd grown up in weather like this, but the sudden chill made the cattle restless, especially the pregnant heifers. Clay checked on them twice a day, sometimes 3, always with Rusty following a few steps behind like a silent shadow. One evening, as the sun dropped low and orange behind the hills, Clay noticed something strange. The heifers kept shifting their weight, flicking their tails, pacing more than usual. Molly barked at the pasture, confused. Clay rubbed his jaw. "Storm's comin'," he murmured. Rusty lifted his head sharply, ears twitching. He felt it too. Within an hour, the wind picked up. Not the normal winter wind. This one pushed the fences, rattled the barn roof, sent dust swirling in hard circles. Clay stepped outside with a lantern, Lila trailing behind him. "Uncle Clay, is it safe?" she whispered. "It will be," he said. "But the cows don't like storms. We gotta check on him." Rusty stood at the gate, muscles tense, eyes locked on the pasture as if he knew something deeper than weather was coming. Clay grabbed the gate handle, and just then the first crack of thunder rolled across the sky. It wasn't gunfire, not danger like that, but it was loud enough to make the cattle panic. The heifers bolted. Molly barked wildly as the whole herd surged toward the far fence, hooves pounding the ground like rolling drums. Clay cursed under his breath. "No, no, no, don't bunch up." But the wind howled harder, pushing the cows into disarray. Then Clay saw the real problem. The youngest heifer, June, had slipped on the wet ground. She struggled to rise, legs sliding in the mud. The other cows, blinded by panic, were running straight toward her. Clay ran. "Move. June, get up. Come on, girl." But he knew he was too far. The herd was too fast. They wouldn't see her in time. "Rusty!" Clay shouted without thinking, turning toward the bull. Rusty was already moving. Not running wild. Not charging blindly. But moving with a purpose that made Clay's breath catch. Rusty stormed into the pasture with long, powerful strides, cutting between the panicking cows and the fallen heifer. He lowered his body, not to fight, not to scare, but to redirect the herd. His presence alone shifted their path, forcing them to split around him. Clay froze. Lila gasped beside him. He's protecting her. Rusty planted himself in front of June like a wall made of muscle and instinct. The herd curved around him, avoiding him, trusting him the way animals trusted a leader. With the danger past, Rusty turned his head back to June and nudged her gently, first once, then twice. She tried to rise but slipped again. Clay rushed forward, mud splashing up his boots. "Easy girl," he said, squatting next to her. Together, Clay lifting, Rusty nudging, they helped June onto her feet. June wobbled, steadied herself, and walked a few shaky steps. Rusty followed her, guarding her flank, making sure she stayed upright. Clay's heart was pounding so hard it hurt. He placed a hand on Rusty's shoulder. You saved her. You actually saved her." Rusty breathed out in a long, low rumble, calm again now that the danger had passed. Lila reached the fence, eyes wide, cheeks red from the wind. "Uncle Clay," she whispered. He knew. He knew exactly what to do. Clay swallowed. "Yeah," he said softly. He did. They walked back toward the barn, the storm easing behind them, the wind slowing to a gentle hum. Rusty stayed close to June until she was safely inside, then turned to Clay with that familiar look, the one that said more than any words ever could. "You ain't just special," Clay whispered, rubbing Rusty's neck. "You're one of a kind." What Clay didn't know was that this moment, the storm, the fallen heifer, Rusty stepping between danger and life, would travel far beyond the ranch. Neighbors would talk. The vet would tell others. And soon, folks who once called him low profit would see him in a very different light. But more importantly, this was only the beginning of Rusty's true purpose. The storm passed by morning, leaving the ranch washed in a soft gray light, the grass still glittering with cold drops of water. Clay barely slept. He kept thinking about the way Rusty had moved, how sure he was, how quick he reacted, how he didn't hesitate for a second. "Most bulls don't think like that," Clay muttered to himself while pouring hot coffee into a chipped mug. "They run from panic, not toward it." When he stepped outside, Rusty was already at the gate, waiting the way he always did. But something in his posture was different. He stood taller, steadier, as if the night had settled a responsibility deeper in his bones. Clay walked over and rested a hand on Rusty's neck. "You did good, boy." Rusty gave a soft grunt and nudged Clay gently as if saying, "I did what needed to be done." Later that afternoon, Dr. Hernandez stopped by to check June. As she examined the heifer, she asked Clay to tell her exactly what happened during the storm. Clay explained everything: the fall, the stampede, Rusty's intervention. The vet looked at Rusty across the pen. "That's rare," she said slowly. "Very rare. Most bulls only think about position, not protection." Clay nodded. "I know." "You ever consider," she added, "that maybe Rusty's value isn't in the profit charts but in his awareness? His instincts?" Clay smiled. "Been thinking that since the day I brought him home." Just then Lila came running out of the house. She had her backpack and a folded piece of paper clutched in her hands. "Uncle Clay," she said, breathing fast. "Can Rusty, see something?" Clay raised an eyebrow. "Sure, sweetheart." Lila unfolded the drawing. It was Rusty again, but not how he looked on a calm day. This time, she had drawn the moment from the storm. Rusty standing between June and the roaring herd, his body angled like a shield, his eyes sharp and focused. Clay stared at it. The picture captured the heart of it, the courage, the calm strength, the purpose. Rusty stepped forward, sniffing the paper gently. Then he did something Clay had never seen him do before. He lowered his head all the way down to Lila's height and held still. Lila reached out slowly and touched his forehead. "I knew you were brave," she whispered softly. Rusty didn't move a muscle. He just breathed quietly, patiently, as if he understood the gentle weight of her words. Dr. Hernandez crossed her arms, impressed. "This bull's got more soul than half the folks in this town." Clay chuckled. "Ain't that the truth?" Later that week, rumors started spreading, not from Clay, not from Lila, but from the neighbors who had heard parts of the story. By Thursday, Ben Carter showed up at the fence line, leaning on the rails with a curious look instead of his usual smirk. "Heard your bull saved a heifer," Ben said. "That right?" Clay didn't brag. He just nodded. "Rusty's got good sense." Ben scratched his beard. "Got better sense than most bulls I've owned." He paused. "If you ever, I don't know, want to rent him out for breedin', I'd pay fair." Clay shook his head. "Rusty ain't a piece of equipment. I'll think about it, but only if it don't stress him." Ben accepted that with a quiet nod. "Fair enough." When he drove away, Clay looked at Rusty across the pasture. "You hear that?" he said softly. "That's the same man who said you'd never be worth a dime." Rusty flicked his crooked ear and continued grazing, unbothered by the world's doubts. Clay leaned on the fence watching him. "You're changing hearts, boy. One person at a time." But neither Clay nor Lila nor the vet knew what was coming next. Because a situation far more serious than a storm, something that required not just instinct, but deep emotional understanding, was already building toward the ranch. And when it arrived, Rusty would again be the first one to feel it. The first sign that something was wrong didn't come from the cattle. It came from Lila. She arrived at the ranch one Saturday morning with her backpack slung low and her eyes red, like she hadn't slept. Clay noticed the moment she stepped out of her mother's car. Her shoulders were hunched, her jaw tight, her hands tucked deep inside her sleeves. Her old habit whenever something heavy sat on her mind. Her mother waved goodbye and drove off. Lila didn't move. Clay stepped onto the porch. "Mornin', kiddo," she whispered. "Can I stay outside for a bit?" Clay nodded slowly. "Course you can." Lila walked past him with small, stiff steps and headed toward Rusty's pen. Rusty noticed her instantly. He lifted his head from the hay, ears twitching, tail still. He sensed feelings the way other animals sensed weather. Lila sat on the same old log as before, hugging her knees to her chest. Rusty moved closer to the fence but didn't push. He only stood there, breathing slow and steady, giving her space. After a full minute of silence, Lila whispered, "Mom says I have to switch schools." Clay stopped in his tracks. She kept her eyes on the dirt. "I don't want to go. I don't know anyone there. I don't want more changes." Rusty let out a low rumble, a soft sound he made only when someone near him was hurting. Clay sat beside her on the log. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Lila shrugged, eyes still wet. "It doesn't matter. I'm just scared." Rusty stepped closer until his shadow stretched over them. Then, with surprising gentleness for such a big animal, he lowered his head and rested his chin against the top beam of the fence, just inches from her shoulder. Lila didn't look up, but she leaned slightly toward the warmth of Rusty's breath. Clay watched the scene unfold quietly, feeling something tighten in his chest. "You know," Clay said softly, "Rusty knows about change. When he first came here, he didn't know anything. New place, new smells, new people. He was scared too." Rusty snorted as if confirming it. Lila sniffed. "But he's brave now." Clay nodded. "Yeah. But he wasn't brave because he wanted to be. He became brave, 'cause he stayed close to someone he trusted." Lila wiped her cheek. "You?" "No," Clay said gently, eyes softening. "You." Lila blinked up at him. "Me?" "Rusty watches you more than he watches anyone," Clay said. "You make him calm. And he makes you calm. That's how it works." Rusty lowered his head further and breathed warm air onto Lila's arm, his way of saying you're not alone. For the first time that day, Lila managed a tiny smile. "He's really trying to help me, isn't he?" Clay nodded. "He always helps when someone's hurting." Just then, Molly barked sharply from the barnyard. Clay stood. "Probably just the chickens fussin'. Stay here with Rusty, okay?" Lila nodded, sitting closer to the fence than before. But when Clay walked off, Rusty didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Lila, watching every small movement she made, reading her sadness the way he had read the injured heifer in the storm. Then Lila whispered something Clay didn't hear. "Rusty, can I tell you a secret?" The bull didn't move, but his eyes softened. "I'm scared I won't fit in anywhere," she said, voice trembling. "Not at home. Not at school. Not anywhere." Rusty breathed out slowly, lowering his forehead until it pressed gently against the fence right beside her. She reached up and placed her hand on that warm spot, closing her eyes. At that moment, one hurting child and one misunderstood bull sat together in a silence so warm and so honest, it felt like the wind itself held still to listen. Clay returned minutes later and stopped when he saw them. Rusty guarding her. Lila leaning into him. Both steadying each other in a way no human words could. Clay swallowed hard. "Good boy," he whispered. But deep inside he knew this was more than comfort. Rusty wasn't reacting to sadness. He was recognizing it. And that emotional instinct was about to be tested in a way none of them could predict. A moment was coming, something subtle, human, painful, and Rusty would sense it long before anyone else understood what was happening. The wind softened as the afternoon settled in, but Lila's mood stayed heavy. Clay tried to keep her busy, feeding chickens, helping Molly gather stray hay, brushing down one of the gentler horses, but nothing seemed to lift her spirit. She moved slowly, quietly, as if her thoughts were weighing her down more than her boots. Rusty watched her every step from across the fence. By late afternoon, Clay noticed something else. Lila wasn't talking at all anymore. Not even small replies. She kept her face down, her hands balled into her sleeves, and her shoulders were tight like she was holding something inside too big for her body. "Kiddo," Clay finally said, "you want to tell me what's really going on?" Lila shook her head. "You sure?" Another tiny shake. Clay sighed and looked toward the pasture. Rusty was standing under the oak tree, but he wasn't grazing. He was staring at them, alert, ears forward. Watching. Clay put a hand on Lila's back. "Come on. Let's sit by Rusty a while." They walked to the fence. Rusty stepped out from under the oak and came right to them, almost like he'd been waiting. Lila hesitated, then reached out and touched his forehead. "Hi, Rusty," she whispered. Rusty's breath warmed her fingers. He lowered his head and held still, letting her lean her cheek against the fence rail. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then something happened Clay hadn't expected. Lila's breathing changed. It became short, fast, uneven. Clay frowned. "Lila? You all right?" She shook her head hard. Her shoulders trembled. She pressed her hands to her eyes and tried to stay quiet, but her breath hitched in a painful way that Clay recognized immediately. She was having a panic attack. "Oh no," Clay knelt beside her. "Honey, look at me. Slow breaths, okay? In and out." But she couldn't. Her breaths came in sharp, panicked bursts, each one quicker than the last. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Her body curled in on itself. I can't," she gasped. Clay placed a hand on her back, helpless against the rising wave of fear swallowing her. But Rusty moved before Clay could do anything more. The bull stepped closer, closer than he ever did during moments of tension, and lowered himself until his head was level with Lila's chest. With stunning gentleness, he pressed the full warm weight of his forehead against the fence, right where her hands were trembling. The pressure startled her. Her hands stilled. Rusty held there, steady, warm, unmoving. Not pushing. Not forcing. Just present. Lila's breath slowed by instinct, matching his calm rhythm. Clay froze, stunned. Rusty let out a slow exhale, the sound deep and steady. Lila heard it. She felt the vibration through the wood. She matched it. One breath. Then another. Then another. The panic eased out of her like water draining from a tight bucket. After a long minute, Lila wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Her breathing turned steady. Her shoulders dropped. She placed her forehead against the same spot Rusty was pressing on the fence. "I'm sorry," she whispered shakily. Everything's changing, and I don't know how to stop feeling scared." Rusty shifted slightly, nudging the fence once as if saying, "You're not alone. I'm here." Clay swallowed the lump in his throat and placed a hand gently on Lila's shoulder. "You did good, sweetheart," he murmured. "Real good." But he knew the truth. Rusty had done good. Better than any adult could have in that moment. Lila slowly sat down on the ground, breathing calm now, leaning back against the fence. Rusty lowered himself too, folding his legs and resting right beside her, only the wooden barrier separating them. Clay sat down next to her. For 10 quiet minutes, the three of them stayed like that, girl, man, and bull, sharing a peace that none of them wanted to break. When Lila finally spoke again, her voice was soft but clearer. "Uncle Clay, I don't think I'm scared of changing schools anymore." Clay blinked. "Oh? How come?" She looked at Rusty. "Because he changed everything, and he's okay. Maybe I can be okay too." Rusty closed his eyes at her words, as if satisfied with her answer. Clay stared at the bull in awe. "You saved her twice," he whispered under his breath. "First her fear, now her heart." But Rusty wasn't done proving himself. Because something unexpected, something that would reveal the depth of his loyalty, was about to unfold on the ranch. And this time he would be the one needing help. The next morning rose quiet and cold, the kind of morning where sound traveled slow across the ranch. Clay brewed coffee, Molly stretched by the fireplace, and Lila slept in the guest room, finally peaceful after yesterday's storm inside her heart. But outside something was wrong. Clay felt it before he saw it. Maybe it was the stillness in the air, maybe the silence from the pasture, or maybe the way Molly lifted her head, ears pricked sharply toward the barn. "Something's off," Clay murmured. He stepped onto the porch, expecting to see Rusty near the gate like always. But Rusty wasn't there. Clay frowned. "Where'd you wander off to, boy?" Molly barked once and sprinted toward the pasture. Clay followed, his boots crunching the frozen ground. When he reached the fence, his breath caught. Rusty was lying down. Not resting. Not sunbathing. But curled tight, his chin pressed into the dirt, his entire body tense like he was trying to hide his discomfort. Clay climbed the fence in seconds. "Rusty?" he called gently. "Hey boy, what's going on?" Rusty didn't stand up. He flicked his ear once, acknowledging Clay, but his sides were heaving too fast, too shallow. The kind of breathing Clay had seen only a handful of times in cattle. The kind that meant pain. Clay knelt beside him. "Easy now. I'm right here. Let me look at you." Rusty tried to shift his weight, but his front leg trembled hard. Clay ran his hands along Rusty's shoulder and felt heat, too much heat. "Damn," Clay whispered. "You're running a fever." Molly circled anxiously, whining. Clay pulled out his phone. "Dr. Hernandez, I need you now." Rusty's down and struggling. The vet arrived 20 minutes later with her kit, stepping out of her truck with urgency. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing I could see," Clay said. "He was fine last night. Ate normal. Walked normal. But this morning?" Rusty groaned low as she approached. Dr. Hernandez knelt beside him. "Easy, big guy. Let me check." She took his temperature, listened to his breathing, pressed along his neck and chest. Then she paused. "Clay," she said quietly, "he's got an infection. A bad one." Clay felt his stomach drop. "From what?" "Could be a small cut that got dirt in it," she said. "Could be his immune system got overwhelmed after the storm stress. Bulls hide pain well, but he's been fighting this for hours." Rusty lifted his head weakly at the sound of their voices, his crooked ear twitching once before falling still. Lila, awakened by the commotion, ran toward them. "Uncle Clay, what's wrong?" Clay swallowed, trying to stay calm. "Rusty's sick, sweetheart. Dr. Hernandez injected antibiotics and pain relief. He needs rest. And he needs someone with him constantly. If he pushes himself or gets cold, he'll get worse." "I'm not leaving him," Clay said instantly. Lila knelt beside Rusty and touched his forehead gently. "He helped me, now we help him." Rusty closed his eyes, breathing slow but shaky as if he knew she was there. The hours passed slowly. Clay sat beside Rusty in the pasture, refusing to move away even when the cold wind settled in. Molly curled up at Rusty's belly for warmth. Lila brought blankets, tucking them around Clay's shoulders while she spoke softly to Rusty about her sketches, her fears, her hope for him to get better. Afternoon turned to evening. Rusty shifted once, letting out a low rumble, not in pain but in gratitude. Clay leaned forward and rested his hand on Rusty's thick neck. "You listen to me, big guy," he whispered. "You've helped everyone on this ranch. You've stood for us, protected us, understood us. Now it's our turn to stand for you." Lila nodded, wiping her cheeks. "Please get better. I need you." Rusty opened his eyes just a sliver, soft, tired, but full of warmth. He wasn't giving up. Not yet. Clay stayed awake the entire night, watching over him. Every time Rusty shivered, Clay adjusted the blankets. Every time Rusty struggled to breathe, Clay whispered reassurance. Every time Lila dozed off beside him, Rusty lifted his head just enough to check she was safe. As dawn approached, a thin pink line stretched across the horizon. Rusty struggled once more, then managed to push himself halfway upright, breathing hard but determined. Clay's heart jumped. "That's it, boy. Come on." Rusty sat upright fully, shaking off the frost from his back. He was exhausted, but present. Lila threw her arms around Clay's waist. "He's getting better." Rusty lifted his head toward her and let out a soft, warm grunt. It was small, but it was hope. And Clay knew. Rusty wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for them. But Rusty still didn't stand, not yet. His greatest challenge, and the moment that would show the whole town who he truly was still waiting for him in the days ahead. Rusty's recovery came slowly, steady but slow. He managed to sit upright for longer stretches, but standing was still too much for him. Every time he tried, his legs trembled as if the ground itself was made of water. Clay didn't push him. He knew bulls healed on their own time. For 3 days, Clay slept outside in the pasture. Lila brought him blankets and hot soup. Molly stayed curled against Rusty's side, her little body keeping him warm through the cold nights. The heifers often gathered near the fence, watching quietly as if the whole herd knew something important was happening. On the 4th morning, Rusty finally stood. Not gracefully. Not in one movement. But slowly, like an old rancher pulling himself out of a worn rocking chair. Clay held his breath, afraid to even blink. Rusty took one shaky step. Then another. Lila clapped her hands over her mouth, eyes wide with hope. "He's walking." Rusty kept going, pausing only when he reached Clay. He lowered his head and pressed it gently against Clay's shoulder, his way of saying thank you. Clay wrapped an arm around the side of Rusty's face. You scared the hell out of me, boy. Over the next few days, Rusty regained his strength. His eyes brightened. His breathing steadied. His walk became smoother, surer, stronger. By the end of the week, it was like watching a sunrise, slow at first, then suddenly bright and undeniable. But the real test came on the 8th day. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm enough that the frost finally melted into soft mud. Clay and Lila were stacking hay near the barn while Rusty grazed near the fence, looking more like himself again. Birds chirped lazily as if the whole ranch was breathing easier. Then Clay heard a sound he never liked hearing. The sharp, panicked bleating of a calf. He turned toward the south pasture and froze. A newborn calf, one of June's, was stuck in the narrow ditch that ran along the fence line. The calf must have wandered too close and slipped down the muddy slope. Now it was flailing, unable to climb back up. Its cries echoed through the air like a plea. June paced frantically at the edge, unable to help. Damn it, Clay muttered, tossing his gloves aside. If she panics, she'll make it worse. He broke into a run toward the ditch. Lila followed a few steps behind, worry etched across her face. But they weren't the only ones running. Rusty heard the calves' cries. And even though he was still recovering, even though his legs had only regained their strength that week, even though no one expected anything from him yet, Rusty moved. Not a slow walk, not a cautious trot, but a determined, powerful stride straight toward the ditch. Clay's heart pounded. Rusty, easy. You're not healed yet. But Rusty wasn't listening. Instinct had taken over. June cried louder when she saw him. Rusty stepped between her and the ditch, not to block her, but to keep her from tumbling in after her calf. He moved with a gentle assertiveness, guiding her back with soft nudges until she stood a safe distance away. Then Rusty turned to the ditch. The calf bleated again, legs slipping helplessly against the mud. Rusty lowered his head into the trench, bracing his hooves wide for balance. Careful, Clay whispered, watching every movement like it was life or death. Rusty slid his nose under the calf's chest. The mud made everything slippery, but he kept adjusting, pushing gently, lifting inch by inch. His muscles trembled, he wasn't fully recovered, but he refused to give up. Come on, boy, Lila whispered, hands clenched tight. Please? With one last push, Rusty lifted the calf high enough for Clay to grab. Clay pulled the small body over the edge, setting it safely on the grass beside June. The mother rushed forward, licking her calf rapidly, calling softly to calm it down. Rusty, exhausted, breathing hard, lifted his head and stepped back. Clay ran down into the ditch and put both hands on Rusty's neck. You did it. You actually did it. I don't know how the hell you found that strength, but you did. Rusty's legs shook beneath him, but he remained standing, staring at the calf with soft eyes to make sure it was safe. Lila wiped tears from her cheeks. He's not just brave, he's good. Clay nodded slowly, truth blooming in his chest like something long known but newly understood. Yeah, he whispered, he's good all the way through. Just then, Ben Carter and two other neighbors pulled up on the gravel road. They had seen the commotion from their place. They leaned against the fence, watching the scene unfold. Ben whistled. That bull of yours, he said, shaking his head. He ain't normal. Clay smiled without looking away from Rusty. Never said he was. The neighbors watched in silence as Rusty checked on June and the calf one more time before finally lowering himself to the ground to rest, tired but proud. Lila knelt beside him and placed her hand gently on his cheek. You're a hero, she whispered. Rusty blinked slowly, leaning into her touch. Everyone who saw it that day knew the truth. Rusty wasn't just valuable. He wasn't just smart. He wasn't just loyal. He was special. But one more moment, one last quiet moment, would prove just how deeply his presence would shape the hearts on this ranch, and the lesson he would leave behind. Spring arrived with soft rain, new grass, and a sense of calm settling over the Broken Creek Ranch. The air felt gentler. The mornings felt lighter. And Rusty, fully healed now, looked stronger than ever. His coat shined in the sunlight, his stride carried confidence, and the herd moved with an ease that only came when they trusted their leader. Clay often found himself stopping mid-task just to watch Rusty in the pasture. He's something, isn't he? Clay whispered once, leaning on the fence. Lila smiled beside him. He's home. But not everyone understood Rusty's worth the same way Clay and Lila did. Word had spread across the county about a bull who protected calves, calmed panicked herds, and even soothed a child's fear. Soon ranchers from nearby towns started showing up, hoping to see Rusty for themselves. Most came out of curiosity. Some came with admiration. A few came with wallets wide, thinking Clay might be tempted. One Saturday morning, a rancher from the next county arrived in a brand new truck. He stepped out wearing polished boots and a crisp shirt, the kind of man who saw cattle as moving dollar signs. "You're Clay Walker?" the man asked. Clay nodded. "That's me." "I've heard about your bull," the rancher said, tipping his hat toward Rusty, who stood calmly under the oak with Molly curled by his hooves. "Folks say he's got instincts you can't teach." Clay watched Rusty for a moment before answering. "He's a good bull." "I'd like to make you an offer," the rancher said, pulling out a small notebook. "I'll pay you $8,000 for him. Cash." Clay froze. 8,000. More than Rusty's weight, more than profit numbers, more than he might make in a year. Lila stiffened beside him. Rusty lifted his head at the sound of the rancher's voice. Clay cleared his throat. "I'm not selling him." "You sure?" The man laughed lightly. "That bull was marked low profit, wasn't he? I'll turn him into a real asset on my place." Clay's jaw tightened. "He's already an asset. Just not the kind you're thinking, duh." The rancher shrugged. 10,000. Final offer. Lila stepped forward before Clay could reply. "He's not for sale." The rancher blinked. "Young lady, I'm talking business. You let the men." "No," Lila said firmly, eyes steady. "He's family." Rusty took 3 steps toward the fence, placing himself between Lila and the stranger, not aggressively, but in a protective, grounded way that needed no explanation. Clay exhaled slowly. "Like the kid said, he's not for sale." The rancher stared at Rusty, then at the 2 humans who stood with him. Finally he shook his head. "You're making a mistake," he said, climbing back into his truck. Clay watched the dust trail behind the truck fade into the distance. Lila turned to Clay, worry in her eyes. "You're not mad, right? That I spoke up?" Clay smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I needed to hear it from you too. Reminded me what matters." They turned to Rusty. The bull stood quietly, head slightly lowered, just watching them. Clay walked over and pressed his forehead to Rusty's warm cheek, a gesture he rarely showed but felt deeply. Rusty closed his eyes, breathing in slow contentment. "You gave us something money can't buy," Clay whispered. "Peace, trust, courage. You taught this ranch how to feel again." Lila knelt to scratch Rusty's jaw. "And you helped me be brave when I felt small." Rusty leaned into her gently, his silent way of saying he understood. The evening sky warmed to orange as they sat with him, Molly curled around his front leg like always. The calves grazed nearby, June nudged her baby softly, and the herd stayed calm under Rusty's steady watch. Clay finally spoke, voice soft as the sunset wind. "Funny, ain't it? They rejected you for low profit. But you gave us more than any chart could measure." Lila nodded. "He didn't need to be worth money. He just needed to be loved." Rusty lifted his head and looked between them, his crooked ear twitching in that familiar way that always made Clay smile. And in that moment, with no words spoken, all 3 of them understood the truth. Value wasn't in numbers, or size, or strength, or breeding charts. Value was in the heart. The steady, loyal, quiet heart that showed up when someone needed him most. Clay whispered the final thought aloud, letting it settle over the pasture like a soft blanket. This bull wasn't made for profit. He was made for purpose. And Rusty, the calf once thrown away, stood proud in the golden light, finally seen for who he truly was. A guardian, a friend, a lesson in loyalty, and the heart of the ranch. The end.